This time on Gamers Week podcast.
But I've always loved Chippendales. All the games that came, was it Disney's games that came out through, I think it's Capcom, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the Afternoon Collection.
Yeah, they were all pretty fantastic. No, Tailspin.
You shut your mouth.
I love the theme song, though, from the show.
Yeah.
I don't remember that one. I'd have to listen again.
Tailspin.
Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell.
Yep, that's all I can remember off the top of my head anyway, so.
Goddamn Loch Ness Monster.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Gamers Week podcast. Like the name says, we analyze the best, worst, and weirdest headlines of the past week in the video game industry. This is episode 16, and today is Wednesday, April 6th, 2022. My name is Blue Williams, and I'll be your host this evening, but I'm not alone. Oh no, I'm here with my two friends. I've got Ryan, aka FGX Punk 85.
Oh, you went there.
And Donnie G, aka Immortal 316.
Ooh, yes.
Hello, gentlemen.
How's it going? Thank you for that, by the way.
You're welcome. All right, well, let's not dilly-dally. Let's go right into our reviews, reactions, and requests. First off, from @GoHoboGo, listening now, fun podcast. Glad my Twitter handle made you laugh. # Shining Force for the win.
I love that name.
It's a good name. Soul Shattered BBJJJ says, I saw this podcast in TikTok, and honestly, it's pretty awesome. I can get a summarization of the gaming industry with weekly updates without having to dig through articles. Hosts are funny and enjoyable. And Princess Kitty Mew Mew says, Donnie, Blue, and Rybread are three amazing friends. Gamers Week podcast was one of the highlights of my week, both the uncut patron episode and the regular episode. They are a wonderful distraction to the world for a couple of hours. I love that they host game nights and interact with their listeners through Discord and other social media platforms. They always support their listeners' endeavors. They are truly a kick-ass podcast.
Thank you, Kitty.
Thank you, Kitty, and Soul Shattered, both of you, for the super kind words.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Now it's time for the very important poll.
Wow, a jingle. The bar has been raised.
Yes.
That sounded a little NKOTB-ish, I'm not going to lie.
I was going for Night Trap.
Where the bad boys will find you.
That's right. So every Monday on Twitter, we post our VIP, aka Very Important Poll. If you'd like to participate, follow us on Twitter at GamersWeekPC. So the question of the week was, in your opinion, what is the most difficult 16-bit video game? And our choices were Comic Zone, which got 16% of the vote, The Lion King, which got 20.4% of the vote, Super Ghouls and Ghosts took this one by storm, 53.6% of the vote. And of course, we had 10.1% of the folks say other. And let's look at some of the answers from the other category. So Marsupial Gamer said Castlevania Dracula X was brutal. Mondane said Brandish on the Super Nintendo, an action RPG that has weapon durability, puzzles, and you can fall through the floor into a level you previously beat with all the monsters respawn. That is
that sucks.
Dan Hamill 2 said The Immortal on Sega Genesis, kind of like Dark Souls, except way less fair. That's amazing then. Sick Jake said Shadow of the Beast on Genesis was programmed wrong with a faster game speed over the Amiga original. The game is insane. And finally, DYHPTG said, you don't have to beat The Lion King or Comic Zone twice to get the real ending. Touche, sir.
He's got a point, yeah.
All right, Donnie, so what did you go with?
I think I went with The Lion King. In all essence, all three of these games are really difficult. Super Ghouls and Ghosts didn't give you any type of leeway from its predecessor. It just decided to give you not only its own 2 middle fingers, but it borrowed 2 more from somebody else and said, oh, you thought regular Ghouls and Ghosts or Ghosts and Goblins was fun? Try this. And no, I have not. There's a reason why I've not played that game since I was a kid.
I will say it's a little bit more fair than Ghosts and Goblins, but it's still, you're right, extremely, extremely difficult. And they're like, hey, you know what? We loved that whole gimmick about having to play it twice. Yeah. Sure, let's just put it in this one too. Like, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
Why the hell you got to torture us?
Right. Blue, what about you?
So I went with Super Star Wars. I was kind of deciding, like, what's the most difficult 16-bit video game? And you can go either way with that. You can go with a game that's difficult because it's just a bad game. It's designed poorly. It's unfair, whatever. Or you can go with games that are super difficult, but you can still play them. And so that was kind of how I took it. And I think of all the games that I managed to play to completion as a child, Super Star Wars is by far the most difficult that I ever played. We never owned it when I was a kid, but we rented it all the time on the weekend. And nice. Definitely practice and practice and practice until I could beat that game pretty much with my eyes closed. So I can't do it now, in case anybody's thinking I'm some sort of like super gamer. I definitely can't do it now.
So I wonder if people were thinking like you guys were the sadistic family that were coming in to rent it every single weekend.
Probably the kids working the counter were like, should we call Child Protective Services? Right. Like, we're a little concerned.
So the one stage that drives me nuts with that game is the speeder stage, in which you have to keep picking up gas, and it's insane. It's all over the place. You're constantly moving in several different directions. You're banging into stuff. So I have to ask you, how do you beat that section?
You know, what's funny is that level I thought was a nice little break between the really other difficult platforming levels. Yeah. Out of that whole game, that's not the level that I thought was difficult.
That's great.
Apparently I just suck.
Well, like I said, I was a kid. I can't do it now.
That was amazing.
Yeah. For me, I picked Comic Zone. That game is so incredibly difficult. For anybody who's not familiar with it, it's basically a beat 'em up that is staged inside the books of a comic, which is a really cool concept if you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The one thing that makes it so incredibly difficult, though, is that you're kind of stuck in each one of those panels when you play, so there isn't a whole lot of movement that you can get around, and the enemies are ridiculously hard right from the get-go. There is no learning curve. It's just they drop you in and say, good luck. And I remember using Game Genie for that game and still having a difficult time. And so that one is definitely high on my list as far as difficulty goes. But I just wish there was an easy mode. There we go. Easy modes for games.
Oh, no, he said it. He said it.
Did say it.
I need an easy mode for comics.
All right, let's move on to our patron shout-outs.
We couldn't do what we do without the help of our gorgeous patrons. Here are the generous folks supporting Gamers Week on Patreon. We have a new patron to announce. Please give a big welcome to Bill Tucker. Woo! 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 He'll be joining Fruitcake's #1 Stan, The Wizard of Zardoz, Clayman71, Great Saiyaman 81, B&T Zilla Guy, Geek With That, Crunchy Kong, Sheriff Snacks, Frank Grande, Producer BTW, Steven Sand, Terry Canair, Ducks in Disguise, Jim and Colleen, Games with Coffee, Davey PGH, the Red Ox PDX family, including Shannon and Luke, Zach Huge Thanks, Random Retro Dude, Princess Kitty Mew Mew, Mega Retro Man, Emo-esque, and Rybread's #1 fan. If you like what you hear today, and we really hope you do, please consider joining us on Patreon. Your support helps cover the cost of producing the show, as well as other cool stuff we'll be doing, like prizes and giveaways. You'll also gain access to our weekly patron-only bonus cast called Gamers Week Uncut, Patrons with Benefits. Visit patreon.com/gamersweek or follow the link in the show notes to learn more.
All right, it's time for headlines, and our headline segment is, of course, proudly sponsored by the Retro Game Club podcast. It's a fantastic, family-friendly retro gaming podcast. In each episode, Rob and Hugh pick 2 games to play and discuss, as well as news, interviews, and other topics. They just released their episode 118, where they discuss Legacy of Ys and Chippendale Rescue Rangers. Visit them at retrogameclub.net or follow the link in the show notes.
I sensed a little bit of, is it pronounced that way?
I'm just going to go with it. If you read it fast enough, it sounds like you know what you're talking about.
Right. Wise? Legacy of Wise?
I'm 98% sure it's Ys.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
Donnie, you're a fan of Chippendale Rescue Rangers, correct?
I am.
Yep.
Now, I'm also a fan of Chippendales, too. Ooh.
Okay. That's a different game. You have to go to Steam for that one.
I've actually beaten both Chippendales Rescue Rangers 1 and Rescue Rangers 2 and tried to, I'd say like the first level of the Chippendales, the first game, tried to do a speed run on it. And I was like, nope, not interested. No thanks.
Really?
I was actually thinking about doing that full board for an RGB high score one time, but supposedly there's a lot of opportunity to, we'll say, point farm on that one.
Yeah.
So I ended up not going with it, but I've always loved Chippendales. All the games that came, was it Disney's games that came out through, I think it's Capcom, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the Afternoon Collection.
Yeah, they were all pretty fantastic. Not Tailspin.
You shut your mouth.
I love the theme song though from the show.
Yeah.
I don't remember that one. I'd have to listen again.
Tailspin.
Yeah, it doesn't ring a bell.
Yep, that's all I can remember off the top of my head anyway, so. All right, so first up from Sportskeeda, Japanese video game developer of King of Fighters, SNK Corporation, is reportedly almost entirely owned by Saudi Prince's Foundation. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is the largest stakeholder in the Japanese company. The video game maker has produced iconic franchises like King of Fighters, Metal Slug, and Fatal Fury. These will now be controlled by MISK, M-I-S-K, led by Mohammed bin Salman, as the deal has now been confirmed. The owner of SNK Corporation has been a tightly kept secret. The underlying reason for the decision may have been the controversy surrounding Mohammed bin Salman. He was reportedly involved in the capture or kill of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018, which was unearthed by a U.S. intelligence report in 2021. Nevertheless, the Saudi Crown Prince has become the largest holder in the Japanese giant, with 96% of the shares under him. This follows previous investments by the prince into gaming. The nation's public investment funds have been used to acquire $3 billion worth of stock in Activision Blizzard, Take-Two, and Electronic Arts in 2020. This was followed by over $1 billion of investment to acquire 5% stakes in Nexon and Capcom.
Okay, then.
So apparently Mohammed bin Salman loves his games.
Or he loves the idea of a ballooning industry that is making a crap ton of money.
But SNK, though?
Well, I remember when this was in the headlines, I think it was last year when he had acquired... At that point, I think it came out that he had acquired a minority stock in SNK, but now it's 96%.
I wonder. I mean, here's my train of thought on this. Like SNK, like yes, it's a very popular game company. They have some popular titles like the ones you just mentioned, King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, and Metal Slug. But in all reality, what have they done lately? I myself have not really been aware of anything new that SNK has done aside from the King of Fighters that's coming out that we talked about a couple weeks ago.
Right, 15.
And
So-
Metal Slug Tactics.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, congratulations, but I mean, I would think.
Is it?
Well, okay, lack thereof of congratulations.
This is a very uncongratulations to you, sir.
Basically, so what you were just saying, the previous investments, the nation's public investment funds have been used to acquire $3 billion worth of stock in Activision Blizzard, Take-Two, and Electronic Arts in 2020. Now, that seems more of a diversified investment into popular game companies, Activision Blizzard, Take-Two, and now Capcom. But SNK, that's kind of like...
Well, SNK has had money problems for a long time.
That's true. Yeah.
They were probably just available. It was a way to get in the door.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
Activision Blizzard, Take-Two, and Electronic Arts are, of course, all highly known for their transparency and morals.
Right.
So it makes sense that they would have no problem selling parts of their company off to the crown prince of a country that is known for human rights violations.
Which is, I think, a part of this. I think that this is a PR move by him to rebrand Saudi Arabia's public relations in the world stage. I mean, Saudi Arabia's actually been doing similar stuff for years. I remember they had wrestling. I think it was WWE did a whole bunch of wrestling matches in Saudi Arabia, which did not go over well. So it sounds like to me like they're continuing to want to get into the entertainment media so that they can, in a way, show, hey, we're not that bad at guys. You know, we like video games too. It's cool.
Yeah, we kill the occasional person, but come on, we got video games.
Right. You do that in video games already.
Jeez.
But I think everyone who is just even marginally aware of some of the things that they've done over the years is I think very wary already of them. And I mean, again, he has done many things like, you know, providing women the opportunity to drive, which wasn't previously available to them, and education and all these kinds of things. He's building all this infrastructure. He's got a whole bunch of plans in order to make, I think, like the first fully electric city that's like expanse of like 1,000 kilometers. It's like one street long in the desert. A lot of stuff he's doing. But again, it sounds to me like he's just using this as an opportunity to try to make him look better on the world stage after everything he did.
When this first came out, there was a lot of chatter online about boycotts of SNK as a result of this. And now SNK is now basically a Saudi Arabian company.
Right. 96% of the shares are under him.
Right. It's not been a good year for not been a good several years for video game companies. Each of the other companies listed, Activision Blizzard, Take-Two, Electronic Arts, Ubisoft is not on their list, but if we're talking about companies that have not done well, they should be on there as well. And probably several more we don't even know about. So if you're thinking about boycotting companies for reasons, I guess there is no shortage of reasons. It makes it difficult as a gamer who just wants to do the right thing.
Right.
Like, what is the right thing to do when faced with companies like these?
That is the ultimate conundrum.
That is the ultimate conundrum.
Yeah, like how deep do your convictions lie when SNK comes out with a brand new game that's like taking the world by storm? You're like, I'm gonna buy this game for a little bit.
I gotta be honest, I don't know if SNK has a taking the world by storm game in them.
I don't think so either.
And don't get me wrong, SNK pulled out a lot of great stuff back in the day.
Oh, they did. Absolutely.
They make their living now based on the strength of their back catalog, not because they continue to be innovative or groundbreaking.
Right.
And just imagine, though, $3 billion worth of stock invested if, like, say the U.S. government decided to invest $3 billion worth of stock in video game companies. People would riot, I think, if that was part of our annual budget. But well, one guy calls the shots. I guess it's really easy to get away with.
Yeah. From IGN, Abandoned director explains tweet takedowns and how the prologue is a whole separate game. Hassan Kahraman, director of controversial indie game Abandon, has reiterated that it has not been canceled and said more content will come this year, including the game's prologue, which will be a paid standalone project. Speaking to IGN's Destin Legary, Kahraman explained that the recent decision to delete a number of tweets relating to the game's future plans was a mistaken attempt to keep information about the game relevant and up to date. But it instead led to rumors that the still mysterious horror game was canceled. Alongside the prologue, Kahraman said that the team has plans to add new content for Abandon's long-dormant real-time experience app throughout 2022, and that sometime after the prologue, we will actually start releasing bit by bit more footage, more trailers of the base game. Karaman and Blue Box have garnered headlines thanks to heavy suggestions that the studio was a front for a new Silent Hill game. There was even an internet conspiracy that Karaman wasn't a real person. Ooh, Kaiser Soze. Forcing himself to post a video to prove his own existence. Missed trailer launches and other marketing snafus have only contributed to doubts around Blue Box and Abandoned.
Still focused on the Kaiser Soze reference. And like that, he was gone.
Who is Kaiser Soze?
I do remember the reports that he wasn't a real person, potentially. Well, and that this was going to be a Silent Hill game. I do remember that.
Yeah. If we back up a little bit, the longstanding controversy over Blue Box and Karaman has been that it's basically a front for Kojima, who's still making a Silent Hill game in secret or some other sort of horror-ish game in secret. But it's basically been a case study for either the worst marketing plan ever or the best marketing plan ever, because it's this indie studio that's done basically nothing, but they have the internet talking about them all the time because of all these weird conspiracies. Like they sent out the tweet that said they were working on a game and they didn't want to say the title, but it begins with S and it ends with L.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty, that's very
Silent Hill.
Yeah.
Kojima has made up fake studios in the past for other game releases. And there's all this weird stuff about Karaman and Kojima having the same initials, HK and HK, and having the same translation when you go from Japanese to Turkish. Their names are the same. It's just a lot of weird, like, tinfoil hat stuff, but...
Which the internet loves.
Which the internet loves. And this guy, either on purpose or just because he doesn't know what he's doing, he feeds into it all the time, tweets stuff and then delete it and then says something and takes it back. And it's all very strange. So I don't know if this game is ever actually going to come out or not. I have no idea if it's going to be good or not, but I think a lot of people will have eyes on it when it does.
So my prediction is that the prologue will come out, and at the end of it, it will be like you'll come up to Silent Hill.
Ooh.
Oh.
And then like everybody will lose their collective ish. And then like the truth will be out and everybody's like, oh my God, it's Silent Hill. Ah! And everyone will be happy.
Starring Kojima.
Right. He's like, I got you, bitches.
All right, next up from VGC, Jim Ryan confirms Sony has more studio acquisitions planned. Sony announced the acquisition of Montreal, Canada-based Haven last month, which takes PlayStation's internal studios to more than 18 developers. The move follows the company's recent acquisitions of Destiny creator Bungie, Demon's Souls studio Bluepoint Games, Returnal developer Housemarque, PC port specialist Nix's Software, and Firesprite, a UK-based developer established by former members of SIE Studio Liverpool. And speaking on the latest PlayStation podcast, SIE President Ryan confirmed that the platform holder is working on further deals to buy developers. Ryan explained, "We're in a really good place with PlayStation Studios and have been for the past few years. The critical success and the commercial success of the games that they've been making has given us permission to invest heavily in content creation. Mergers and acquisitions activity in the games industry hit a record $85 billion in 2021 and has been forecast to reach $150 billion this year, with huge deals such as Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard and Take-Two's buyout of Zynga having already been announced in 2022's opening months."
I feel like we're back in the age of robber barons where they own absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the only way to purchase it is through the house company. And that's a little scary to me.
It does lend credence to the idea that we're no longer in a console war, we're in a acquisition war.
But if these companies don't make these intellectual properties exclusive to their own console, then, I mean, does it really matter if they're buying up all these companies? They can do whatever they want. But if they're going to start saying, well, anything that was an Activision Blizzard IP or anything that was a Haven IP is now solely being released on the PlayStation, then, I mean, that doesn't matter to me.
Well, that's been the debate a lot.
Right.
With both of these companies, Microsoft and Sony, trying to beef up their libraries for their own individual streaming services. You know, they may claim today that they don't want to do exclusives, but they may change their mind tomorrow. We never really know what they're going to do. And of course, lots of people are throwing words around like monopoly, which is not really accurate, but you can kind of understand the emotion behind why they would say that. And then also you wonder whether it's good for the gaming industry as a whole to consolidate so many studios under two primary producers. Do you start to get echo chambers of what sorts of ideas gaming should have in it? Do we lose innovation when that happens?
And that's my biggest concern, honestly, when it comes down to it, is the lack of innovation, as you eloquently put it, in an echo chamber as a result of this. You know, Microsoft so far has, I think, been a pretty good harborer of these properties in which they're purchasing, about not making things exclusive and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, they are the ones who are the decision makers. They have the right to say, we don't want that kind of game. We want this specific style of game, what have you. And eventually it's the genres that we love are not going to be money makers for them. So they're not going to be willing to take risks.
Right.
Does that open it up though? So like the intellectual properties that don't make the money for them, would they go off and sell those to another studio who says, hey, I might want to take a crack at this? Or would they be able to license those out if they were smarter and say, okay, we're not going to develop it, but we'll allow this other company to make a game for it, and we'll reap like 50% of the profits or something because we own it.
Which is not a bad strategy at the end of the day.
No.
It's just how much control do they truly want over the process?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. They could go the Nintendo route and say, nah, we're just going to shut it down.
Like, we'll still own it. We're never going to do anything with it ever again. But yeah, we still
you can't
own it.
have it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's mine.
It also, I think, puts a little bit of fear into people who are fans of, let's say, indie studios.
Right.
Like, I really like Double Fine games, and they were bought by Microsoft. And as far as Double Fine was concerned, it was a good thing because they were struggling. Microsoft was able to come in and provide funds that kind of saved Psychonauts 2.
Right.
But is that always going to be a good thing? As consoles get more expensive, people have to choose now. A lot of people have to choose. Do I want to go Sony? Do I want to go Xbox? So what if your favorite indie studio gets bought by the other side that you didn't go with?
Right. I mean, it's not like back in, I keep using that term, back in the day when, you could buy a PlayStation 2 and an Xbox at the same time because they weren't that ridiculously expensive. Now, if you're spending $600 for a system, the average person, the typical person, can only afford one at launch time or, at a year after. It's too expensive now to have multiple.
Right.
And what about the PC gamer that has to wait now?
Years.
The PC master race can wait. It's fine.
We have no sympathy for those folks.
Not much. No.
Well, and we don't, for the most part, we're not waiting on games except for the ones that like are typically on PlayStation that will never see the light of day for PC. And like, I don't know why Sony has decided to not release some of their IPs onto Steam, because it's going to make you money regardless, right? I would have purchased Spider-Man on Steam, hands down, no question. Would I have paid $69 for it? That's debatable. But when
that's probably why they won't.
Right. When it dropped down in price to $19 or even $29, hell yeah, I would have picked it up and played it.
And when it comes out to it, at the end of the day, I think PlayStation, it would probably behoove them to create something similar to Microsoft, where they have an opportunity for people to purchase games through their store through PC. I mean, essentially they're leaving money on the table. I don't think that they would want to go through Steam or through Epic Games, because for one, they lose money on the licensing for that.
Right.
But Sony is a big enough company. They could afford to create their own shop for PC gamers. And I talk about brand loyalty at that point. If they were to bring over all those exclusives right away, that would be awesome for them. And then anything that they got moving forward, making it a paid subscription, whatever it is, But the only thing that you run into is you got to be able to program for the PC too. So there's going to be a lot more development time required. I think if you bring it over to PC.
And those are bad words.
They want to push them out.
Yeah, if you're an investor, those are bad words.
Right.
So do you want less money now or do you want more money in the future? These are tough choices.
For a powerhouse like Sony, it might just be more money in the future because they can afford it. They've got their hands in other different things.
But they're not operating. It seems like they're not operating that way currently.
And you know what? It's interesting is Sony, I think, operates with the Sony Interactive Entertainment wing of their company seems to be in its own silo where everything, all the decisions that are made for it, all the funding that comes from it sticks with that. And then everything else that Sony sells it's basically like a brother company, if you will, where Microsoft doesn't care. Microsoft's just like, throw money all over the place. We can buy whatever. Right? So maybe that's like one of the biggest differences between how they operate, but it's just interesting.
That actually explains a lot.
All right, next up from PC Gamer, Halo, the official cookbook is coming in August.
It's a cookbook.
It's probably, maybe, a coincidence, but just a few days after CD Projekt Red unveiled the official Witcher cookbook, 343 Industries has announced that Master Chief is getting a fancy meal-making guide of his own. Halo, the official cookbook, will include more than 70 recipes from portable snacks you can take with you while in the Warthog to decadent spreads to feed the entire squadron. I love these terminology. It's so corny. I love it. With step-by-step instructions and photos aimed at making everything accessible to chefs of all skill levels. The Halo cookbook is being authored by Victoria Rosenthal, who apparently specializes in this sort of thing. She previously made cookbooks for Final Fantasy XIV, Street Fighter, Fallout, and Destiny. The video game food crossover is definitely a thing, though. We interviewed another game cookbook author back in 2017 about the challenges of adapting World of Warcraft items like Rylac claws into tasty recipes. And in February, Halo voice actor Stephen Downes shared his own personal recipe for Master Chief Chili, which probably contains either Flood or Covenant.
Can you get those at Walmart or you have to order them specially?
I'm sorry, but a Street Fighter cookbook?
Yeah, what?
The only thing that I can think of in relation to Street Fighter cookbook is probably favorite dishes from each region that the fighter is from. But immediately my brain is just like Street Fighter cookbook. Okay, like what special meal does Zangief have? Like Zangief's chicken thighs, like the big
Zangief's cheat day. What's Zangief's cheat day meal?
It's just a 750 milliliter bottle of vodka.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking up the Street Fighter cookbook. Let me see if I can figure out what's in it.
I don't want to know what Blanca eats.
This cookbook features delectable treats found in food stalls on the streets of Japan, Spanish tapas from a flamenco tavern, snacks on a pier in the Amazon River Basin, and much more. With easy-to-follow step-by-step instructions, this cookbook features recipes and characters from every iteration of Capcom's hit Street Fighter series.
Kind of what I thought.
Let's see. Spaghetti carbonara for Ken.
What?
Yeah, what?
Platanos maduros for Blanca. Rolling Thunder is a Earl Grey tea drink for Dudley. An everything bagel for Kyle. What? Chanko Nabe for E Honda. That actually makes sense. And Shoryuken matcha affogato. Ooh, that sounds good. For Ken.
For you.
No, it says Ken.
Wow, Ken's got 2 dishes and Ryu doesn't have one?
Well, just in the sample pictures they've put up here. I'm not looking at the whole book.
Well, I mean, you would think that they would have a sample for each one of the major fighters like Ken and Ryu.
Well, I guess not. I guess they messed up.
Saying.
So, it's a little weird. Anybody going to pick up the Halo cookbook?
You know, I like cooking. So I might try this out. I'd be interested to see what kind of dishes they come up with. Because nothing in the Halo universe speaks to me food. So this will be really, really strange, I think.
What about Moa burgers? They got to have Moa burgers.
Oh, it's true. You know, they did do that. Yeah. And then didn't they have chips that were the flavor of them?
Yeah, I got those.
Well?
They were not bad.
So you have a good point there.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about the everything bagel for Ken? I mean, come on.
For Guile, it was for Guile.
Oh yeah, sorry, for Guile. That does not make sense. Guile seems like a pizza and beer or pizza and wings kind of guy. It just everything bagel.
I'm thinking no carb.
You have to take it up with Victoria Rosenthal, I guess.
I'll be penning a stern letter.
How do you make a everything bagel? Is it just going to the store, buying a bagel, spraying it with some like cooking spray, and then sticking some seeds to it? Are they literally having you like cook bagels in your house?
Prepackaged.
I did not read the whole recipe. I just looked at the picture.
Like, don't shoot the messenger. I didn't read it all.
But if you guys were going to make a crossover cookbook with a video game, what would you pick?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, Super Mario Brothers, everything with a lot of mushrooms.
I was thinking like Zelda Breath of the Wild seems like a good one that maybe could use a cookbook because there's so many recipes in that game. But then I saw there's actually a lot of Zelda cookbooks. I don't think they're licensed by Nintendo, but there's a lot of Zelda cookbooks that already exist.
What about Monster Hunter?
Monster Hunter should have one, probably. But my choice was actually going to be the Ni no Kuni games because there's a lot of food in those games that you eat to get your health back or eat to get certain status effects. And a lot of it looks really, really good, especially in Ni no Kuni 2. The food is customized based on the town that you're in. So that seems like a no-brainer to me.
Nice. I thought I would probably go with Earthbound. Earthbound has a lot of food in it. You can purchase from different shops in the different towns. And one of the cool gimmicks of the game is that if you combine some of the foods together, you get additional help from it. And if the two things don't taste good when they match together, you don't. So it's like, putting salt on something that shouldn't have salt. It doesn't taste good. But I think it would be interesting to see that you could do it based off of each town too. So, what's the cuisine of Threed and Onett and all that stuff. I think that would be pretty cool.
What do you think, Donnie?
I'd do a Burger Time cookbook, man.
That's a softball answer, but I'll allow it.
Right? Swing.
Just contains a lot of salt and pepper on your burger.
And eggs.
And egg. Yep.
Yeah.
Which I like eggs on my burger, so it's all good.
Yeah, I'm a fan of it. Like the first time I tried it, I was like, I'm not sure what this is going to do. And unsurprisingly, it was called a hangover burger, and it had everything on it, even the egg. And sometimes that stuff, it just like spills out all over the place and gets all over your face and whatnot. And it's kind of hard to clean up, and you're just like, sometimes you don't want to deal with it, but other times it's just like, okay, get in my mouth. You're that good. And yeah, I'm a fan of eggs on my burger.
You ever had peanut butter on a burger?
Yeah. Peanut butter bacon on a burger. That's good stuff.
So good.
Never had that.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, you need to look into that.
The first time I had it, it was like, this doesn't sound like it belongs together. But first bite, it was like, oh, I am all in on this.
Like, hey, now, I'll give it a shot.
All right, let's move on to our top 3 new releases of the week.
Lego Star Wars, The Skywalker Saga, PS5, Xbox Series XS, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. Play through all 9 Skywalker Saga films in a game unlike any other. With over 300 playable characters, over 100 vehicles, and 23 planets to explore, a galaxy far, far away has never been more fun. Chrono Cross, The Radical Dreamers Edition, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. Chrono Cross is an RPG that transcends time and space, unfolding across 2 interlinked parallel worlds. With over 40 party members to meet, people and dimensions will intertwine in this epic drama about the planet itself. The 3D models have been upgraded to HD, new illustrations have been added, and all kinds of new features are now included. The House of the Dead remake, Switch. A remade version of the game was introduced in 1997 in arcade platform. A classic arcade rail shooter receives a whole new entourage and gameplay changes to suit modern gaming standards. The game features true to the original gameplay, local 2-player multiplayer, multiple endings, photo mode, achievements, an armory with unlockable weapons, hordes of undead monstrosities in a new game mode, and a gallery with encountered enemies and bosses. Out of these 3, Ryan, which one are you looking forward to?
This is the week that was made for me, I think.
They're like all of them?
We've had such lousy weeks the last couple of weeks as far as game releases, and then now it's like, boom, have them all.
And so Lego Star Wars, all 8, that is pretty impressive.
9.
And even though, 9. That's pretty impressive in the fact that there are so many playable characters and stuff. That looks really cool. Chrono Cross, I've never actually played Chrono Cross, so that would be kind of cool to get into it. As you probably know, I love Chrono Trigger, so I've heard so many interesting things about Chrono Cross. It's people's opinion. Some people love it, some people hate it, and find the fact that there are so many playable characters to be kind of boring with it. But I'd certainly check it out. And House of Dead is probably one of my favorite shooters of all time. The only question I would have is I've never played light gun game on the Switch, so I'd be curious as to how they plan to do that. Is it
right?
Because if it's similar to using like the thumbstick with crosshairs on it, that's not as fun. I think House of the Dead should be played with a light gun, in my opinion. So if I had to pick though one choice out of all 3 of these, I'd probably go with Lego Star Wars.
Interesting. Blue?
So I know that Chrono Cross is probably the best game here in this list. It's probably one of those big, grand RPGs that you're going to get a ton of hours and a lot of depth in. But the one that really makes me excited is House of Dead. I love that arcade game. And I'm thinking that it's got to be a motion control thing with the Joy-Cons, because Nintendo is all about that motion control. So I'm sure that that's how they'll kind of get around the whole light gun thing. The only thing that I just don't know about House of the Dead is it's $25.
Ooh.
Which seems like a lot.
Maybe not worth it on a launch day purchase, but maybe at a sale.
Yeah, put it on the wish list, keep an eye on it, and maybe pick it up later.
Do you know if it's getting a physical release?
No idea. No clue.
Okay, got it.
That's what really makes me nuts, though, about physical releases is you get excited about a game, you buy it digitally because that's all there is and you want to play it, and then 6 months later is like limited run goes, hey, buy our physical. It's like, you're killing me.
Should have just waited.
I don't like waiting. What about you, Donnie?
So I'm like you guys. The all 3 choices are actually 2 choices for me. Chrono Cross, not really concerned about. Although I wanted to ask a question. Does Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger are they in the same world? Are they in the same?
I think so. Yeah, I think they are connected. Yeah.
So when I first saw it, I was like, Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga. Don't we have Lego games for each one of the? I know they've got some for the prequels. Don't they have ones for Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Star Wars, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I have several Lego Star Wars games.
Yeah, so now we're okay. So now it's almost seems like let's take all these games and just add some newer content, and here you go. It's another. And granted, you could spend hours upon hours upon hours in this game, and still haven't unlocked everything. So I think it's going to play to the people who love Star Wars, which myself is included. Mm-hmm. There was the Lego Marvel Superheroes game that I would play with my kids all the time. And this would probably be another great fun entry into the Lego series. But I'm also excited for the House of the Dead remake. I wonder how they're going to do it, how they're going to transition the rail shooter onto the Switch. Maybe it's where you actually have the Joy-Cons disconnected and you have to play like that. That's how you move everything on screen. But I'm excited to see what they do for it.
I like that it's true to the original gameplay as well. So
exactly. And a lot of different, like the local 2-player multiplayer. Come on, that's the way it was meant to be played, not just single player.
Yep.
You've got the kickstand pedal of, moving out of the way or whatever. And was that House of the Dead?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that's what is it? Time Crisis.
Right.
Time Crisis. Okay. I'm getting my shooters mixed up. My apologies.
Easy to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that you can do 2-player local multiplayer, which is basically like it was in the arcade. So that's kind of a nice touch. And
photo mode.
That's a little weird. I don't know about that. Hey, check out me getting my face eaten off.
Like, whenever the zombie exploded, all these guts poured out. It looked like a rainbow. Here, I got it on photo mode, man.
Especially because it was never a pretty game.
No.
It was always kind of rough visually. So that's a weird one.
I think that would be kind of cool to introduce your kids to. Be ready to crap your pants, kids, because we're about to play some House of the Dead.
I don't want to, Daddy. Well, you're gonna.
And you're going to like it. All right, let's move on to our main topic. From gamesindustry.biz, is this the end of E3? To most people, the question over whether E3 is dead or alive is an irrelevant one. In real terms, E3 is a physical event. It is 2 big halls and some smaller ones located in downtown Los Angeles. There are some booths and a press room and some private meeting spaces. That is E3. But to everyone at home, E3 is more of a concept, a series of press conferences and digital videos that reveal the next big wave of video games. The ESA, E3's owners, never had any ownership over this bit. The PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo conferences existed outside of the show. So when the pandemic came along and ended live events, which meant there was no need for press registration or catering or screens or security or furniture, the role that the ESA provided was no longer needed.
E3 is a global brand, and it made sense to at least try a digital event. And last year's show was an ambitious and valiant effort. But when all was said and done, it found itself in 5th position. If you're a developer that wants to get your game in front of a big audience, you would naturally prefer a slot during Nintendo, Xbox, or PlayStation's events, or Jeff Keighley's multi-platform Summer Games Fest. As a result, it's no surprise that E3 decided against doing it again this year. The question is, that when physical events do return fully, where does E3 find itself? Because it was a challenge brand, but even before the pandemic, E3's role was to be the place where industry could play the games and had just been announced. It was for retailers who might stock them, media who might write about them, toy manufacturers who might license them, and so on. But as game publishers have learned to bypass retail with digital distribution, and with developers now speaking directly to fans via social media, the role of E3 has been diminished.
The solution appeared to be to invite consumers in, but E3 never fully committed. And it isn't a great show for gamers. Most of the new titles weren't playable, many were behind closed doors, and there were limited things for fans to actually do. Business audiences and consumer audiences have different needs. That's why Gamescom separates the two. The European Expo is a fantastic business show and a great consumer event, and it achieved that by effectively building 2 different conventions that just happened to take place in the same location. Jeff Keighley's Summer Games Fest, which is primarily a 2-hour show of big game reveals and trailers, has helped maintain this moment in the industry calendar. If Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, and Ubisoft follow Keighley's show like they did last year, then what's the difference for those watching from home? It might carry a different name. There might be a little less press coverage, but for the majority of people not in LA, who cares? Summer Games Fest is a more relevant digital event, led by a media personality that knows his stuff instinctively. If the event adds a physical component, and there are suggestions it might, then E3 has a genuine competitor to go along with its identity crisis. For many in games, E3 has been long dead. A dinosaur of a show that refused to evolve sufficiently and only caters for a small part of an increasingly consolidating industry.
So what I find interesting about E3 is that it was the quintessential premier event for gamers in the 2000s and beyond for a while, right? It was the thing that everyone looked forward to each year to find out what the new games are. I think to what this article kind of pointed out is that it refused to evolve as needs and communication changed between how gamers found out about new games and those kinds of things. So even though E3 has a lot of nostalgic value for people, as we continue to move forward with the gaming industry and how things are announced, that nostalgic factor only resonates with people our age, more or less. Right. And so if you're talking about the next generation of gamers, they don't really have an attachment to E3. Their attachments are to, Sony's presentations that they do on like a biannually, quarterly basis, Nintendo Directs, the Summer Games Fest, all of those things from a digital standpoint. you can, I mean, a lot of times too, E3 was, you had to stick around on your TV and wait for stuff to show up. And you had to follow a schedule with that kind of stuff, where if you're looking at a Nintendo Direct, it's usually like an hour or less, and you get all the information that you need in a short amount of time. So in a way, having one yearly event is not quick enough for gamers of today. It's like the Blockbuster, I guess. And I don't mean to insult anybody who's a big fan of E3, but it's essentially the Blockbuster, where it refuses to recognize that the industry has changed and moved on.
But there is still a Blockbuster, one Blockbuster that exists, and people's love for its nostalgia still visit it. So I agree with you. I agree with the consensus that if you're not going to evolve, then you're going to go the way of the dinosaur. Nobody's going to want to visit you, especially if you've got a competitor like Summer Games Fest that does it better with all the virtual events that we have with Nintendo, with PlayStation. Do we need this conference anymore?
If you're somebody who attended, I think that it's huge, right? There's definitely a desire to keep doing it, because a lot of the appeal of it, especially because for a long time, it was only press and industry people were invited to it. The general public wasn't allowed to be a part of it. So there were networking, and there were opportunities for people to, meet and discuss, and deals were made, and all of these things happened that just aren't what happens nowadays with E3.
Right. I remember last year when the live event was canceled and it was going to be only digital. And then there was a lot of people say, well, it doesn't matter, because Nintendo and Xbox and Sony, they're not going to be there anyway. But then there were other people who were saying that this was actually a big loss for smaller studios outside of the big three, because they needed that exposure. They need to get in front of people's eyes. They need to be able to talk to each other and network and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you do kind of wonder where this sort of transition leaves studios like that. But, I remember because we covered E3, the digital E3, significantly last year. Man, it was way too long. Most of the days were disappointments, because you'd have I remember Capcom did their show and they didn't talk about anything new at all. They just talked about all their existing projects, and there's so much hype that gets built up for these days, and then you're almost always let down. I think the only one who really knocked it out of the park last year was Microsoft. Right. But then they had whole days where they tried to focus on the developer side of things, but then they're still bringing in the consumers and having, watch along live on YouTube. But you can't, like this article says, you cannot mix those audiences. That was a brutal show. I don't think I made it through the whole thing because I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Right. Or you don't care from a developer standpoint.
Yeah, both of those things. But the other thing that I think is worth noting is I don't remember Summer Games Fest being any better. I remember it being shorter, but I don't remember it being better. They had that big announcement for Starfield at the end, but I feel like that was all they had.
It's space.
Yeah, it's space. The game is about space. So,
Don, you bring up a good point. I mean, I honestly, a lot of these, I have been disappointed with the digital versions of those types of shows, events, if you will. There's so much filler that often I wonder if they would just be better off releasing just the cool stuff on their Twitter feed or through YouTube and just saying, hey, we want to announce this game today, like a TRL world premiere for video, music video.
Oh, wow, you just broke out a TRL reference.
Yeah, you just dated us really bad.
That's what I'm here for, guys. So in a way, there's not as much excitement for these kinds of things anymore, at least in my opinion.
No. Why do Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox want to share this spotlight when they don't have to?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That's a great point.
They want to be the center of attention for their big game reveals, and they all command a big enough audience that they can do that. And when you take away the big reveals, there's just not a lot left for E3 to do as far as consumers care about.
They want to be the belle of the ball. And you can't do that if you have to share the stage with everybody else.
Right, exactly. Too many divas in the room. Nobody likes it.
You know, though, like if you look back at past E3s, there was definitely some epic moments to speak of. You know, what was it when was it the PlayStation 3 came out with pricing?
Oh, right.
Yeah, Xbox just spent up $299, walked off.
Right.
Or Reggie Fils-Aimé, I think, had the "My Body Is Ready."
Right. Or you had Miyamoto running around with the Master Sword, or you had Keanu Reeves with the "You're breathtaking" moment.
Yep. So we will miss out on some of those cool things that won't be available on something that's pre-recorded, which is, disappointing.
Yeah, super disappointing. It's like when the Game Awards last year that were only digital. They were so sterile and just so emotionless and so boring. It was like everybody on there was an AI or something. There's just no life left in it when it's all digital and scripted.
But with not physical, but in-person events coming back, most people are more interested in going to con events than they are industry events like this, I think, for the most part. So
That's
even
true.
though E3 is going to be coming back in a physical form,
Maybe.
That's right, because we don't know. They said that they wanted to come back in 2023, if I remember right.
Right, but that's a long time away and a lot can change.
Right. Indeed.
We already have a lot of panels that show up at Gamecom conventions and whatnot. I don't think that is going to be the place where a lot of these companies now start to show off their product. Maybe indie companies do, but the major players, I just doesn't sound like it's a viable concept.
So that's a good question. If E3 came back as an in-person event, what do you think you would have to do to save itself?
Maybe split up. I don't know, like half the weekend is for developers, half the weekend is for the consumer. Maybe don't have consumers sit in on developer stuff that doesn't really pertain to them. I don't know.
Like if you think about some of the biggest conferences that are out there, like Comic-Con and PRGE and stuff like that, the experience of being there is what the draw is.
Right.
The experience itself, yeah.
Right. And so with E3, it would have to be where they would turn this into more of a con, I guess. But I just don't see E3 ever having the same weight as it had in the past.
So they basically would have to change completely, get rid of everything that made E3, and just become yet another con on a calendar that has a lot of cons on it already.
Right. And in LA.
Yeah.
I think competes. So maybe not, I guess.
If that's what it does to save it, that's sometimes you have to do what's necessary to stay relevant. And if they want to continue going down the road to be the place where people announce their games, where people come and experience new gameplay, then they're going to have to do something. Otherwise, it's gone.
You know what no con has done that maybe E3 has the draw to do is that they could host multiple cons at once. So, for example, if it's a weekend, you have it in Atlanta, Houston, New York, LA, Seattle, whatever it is, some of those major cities that, and then of course across the world if you wanted to, but nonetheless, doing them all simultaneously as a expo of gaming for the week. That solves some of the problems you run into with like indie game studios, having some exposure to consumers, getting their names out there. Because they have so much notoriety, you could say E3 is now in your city this month, and they could sell a butt ton of tickets and wouldn't require necessarily for it to be an online event. Because if it's just in LA, there isn't a whole lot for them to work off of.
Right.
So E3, if you use that model,
Yeah.
just put down at the bottom, Gamers Week podcast. That'd be awesome.
And we'll just take a small, like a 1% royalty.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
That's all good. Yeah.
Or you just give us, you invite us every single year to E3. We have an official invite. We've got badges and stuff like that. We can walk through. Hey, got a badge. Oh, excuse me, badge.
Backstage passes.
Excellent.
All right, before we bring in Professor Rybread, let's take a quick break to talk about our sponsor. Gaming History 101 is proudly sponsored by the Leadist Podcast. It's a show where three friends and occasional guests play games about video games, including trivia, game show games, and more. Here is this week's trivia question. A spiritual successor to Dig Dug, this 1982 release featured a weapon wielded by the title character, which was inspired by one of the designers seeing a Super Ball stuck on the roof of a nearby building. What is the name of this game? Tune into the Elitist podcast this Tuesday to hear the answer. You can find the Elitist on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll also have links in the show notes.
All right, thank you for coming, students. Please take your seats. Welcome to Professor Rybread's Gaming History 101. And in today's lesson, we're going to discuss what players turn to in order to master their favorite games before the age of the internet. We, of course, are going to be covering the history of video game tips and tricks guides. So why cover this today? Well, prior to the internet, if you were struggling with a game, you either had to know somebody who already beat it and trust them, or you had to turn to a guide to get unstuck. So I knew that in my recess, there were a bunch of liars. So I couldn't always rely on the people who would tell you how to get through a game. I remember specifically being told that you could get Lara Croft naked if you did the right thing.
I'm pretty sure everybody truly believed that, though.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That was a big one. Like, hey, dude, if you go to this spot and then you press these 5 buttons for 3 hours, Lara Croft will take her top off.
Like, you know what? I'll do it. Seems worth it. Seems like a good investment of my time.
Darn it, Joey. I spent 3 hours.
Told you.
So for you guys, when you were looking for stuff back in the day, where did you go to before the age of the internet?
I don't remember where I got stuff. I just remember the knowledge was just kind of around.
Right.
You know, I mean, you must have picked it up in conversations here or there, or, you know, the neighbor kid heard something at their school. And so you went to their house, you saw them do it.
Yep.
I just remember it just kind of appeared into the ether, like a shared consciousness, I guess.
It was word of mouth. It was the EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly magazines, and Game Pros and stuff. And I remember hanging out in the arcades whenever Mortal Kombat was out and wanting to learn the fatalities. The first time I saw somebody do Sub-Zero's fatality, I was like, whoa. I was like, how do you do that? He's like, I don't know, kid. And it's like, he wouldn't tell me. He wouldn't.
Jerk.
I mean, and I get why he didn't want to tell you, because the competitive fighting scene was pretty popular. Yeah. So he didn't want this guy learning this trick and whatnot. And granted, it wouldn't have mattered, because at the end, if you're able to pull off a fatality, you've already won. So having to sit there and watch the button combinations and try to figure that out, that's pretty much just watching and learning and the word of mouth.
And that was frustrating too. So if you got a game that was like, for example, if you got like a Fester's Quest back in the day,
oof,
your parents bought you that game, you had to play it, right?
You're stuck with it.
Right. So you better figure it out. And that led to a lot of frustrating moments for me as a kid, especially like back when you would rent games too. If there wasn't something that was clear, you only had it for a couple of days. So, and like Battletoads is an example of that for us.
But you had that rented a lot more than a couple days.
Right. We ended up hiding it from my mom for the return. So she got this huge
remember
bill.
You telling me that.
Yeah. Because we wanted to beat it, you know, and there was really nothing out there, probably, you know, Nintendo Power Magazine, but I wasn't allowed to look at those because they were my brothers. So
whoa,
you're
harsh.
on your own, kid. Oh yeah. I wasn't allowed to touch Legos or Nintendo Power. They were all gyms, but
wow.
Yeah.
But, you know, kids today are spoiled. Anytime you need to figure out how to get past a game, all you got to do is go on YouTube and watch a Let's Play. And you know what? That'll take you right through it.
It's right at your fingertips.
Exactly. So I guess a big middle finger to you kids.
I mean, which that has helped me out a lot with the past RGB high score challenges. Is a game that I've never played. Like, okay, I can just sit here and watch a YouTube video on somebody who plays it really quickly. And it's like, okay, I kind of get the gist of it before I experience it for myself. And, you know, that's kind of... It takes away some of the fun, because you want to be able to experience this stuff for yourself for the first time and not watch somebody else do it.
Right, for sure. Especially when it comes to spoilers and stuff, for sure.
Right.
You know, the interesting part about the history, though, of like game tips and tricks and stuff is that I would have expected it to come around as soon as gaming really showed up. So when the arcades hit and when the Atari 2600 hit, I would have expected that there would have been publications about, beating these games, but there really wasn't until the late 70s. So we're talking like 79. So really gaming got their start with featured articles in video game trade magazines. So not even magazines that are dedicated to games journalism, but games about buying the game, like the engineering behind it. So there were some tricks in there. In Japan, the mangas and some of the PC magazines as well included tips. But again, there was no uniquely focused video game magazine out there strictly for players. That changed in 81, which again, to me, actually sounds pretty late when it comes down to it. But the first consumer magazine solely dedicated to video games was called Computer and Video Games. Very, very snazzy title.
Mm-hmm. You got my attention.
Right. And it premiered in the UK. It was actually premiered just 2 weeks before the US-based Electronics Game Magazine, which basically did the same thing. But they were really focused on the reviews of games, upcoming titles, and they would include the occasional trick or tip for game players, but it wasn't really dedicated to that. But later in 81 is where you saw the publishing of 2 hugely popular books that were dedicated to helping players beat games. So strictly, this is how you do these specific games. Here are the buttons that you press and that kind of thing. So Tom Hirschfield's How to Master Video Games and Ken Ushton's Mastering Pac-Man were 2 of the biggest titles that year. So Tom's book included guides on how to get high scores on 30 of the most popular coin-op games at the time. So his was focused on arcades, where Ken's Mastering Pac-Man actually went on to be one of the best-selling video game books of all time and sold over 1.7 million copies. So good on you, Ken.
Absolutely.
Now, I spent hours today and the day before doing research on this, and there seems to be no definitive guide as to the history behind tips and trick guides out there. And one of the things that I've noticed that there's a kind of a hole, if you will. So after 1983 or so, there weren't many game guides that were published in North America, likely due to the video game crash. But in around 1985, in Japan, Super Mario Bros. The Complete Strategy Guide was published by the company Tokuma Shoten, and it was an absolute smash hit. So get this, the book included screenshots of the game, told players exactly what to do on every level of Super Mario Bros. So rather than it being strictly a book where it's just words, this included a lot of visuals for players to use.
It's more like a walkthrough.
Right, exactly. So it borrowed heavily from some of the articles that were published by their magazine, which was called Family Computer. And it went on to sell in Japan in 1985, 630,000 copies and 860,000 copies in 1986, making it Japan's #1 selling book for both years. So novels, fiction, everything. For 2 years in a row, it was How to Beat Mario Bros. And with the popularity of it, actually in 87, the book was translated to English and it was called How to Win at Super Mario Bros. And actually many of the tips that were used in that book and the visuals and stuff were later used in Nintendo Power Magazine, which, Blue, I think you have a copy of this, right?
I do. I have that one and the Zelda one.
There you go. So with the explosion of Nintendo in North America in the mid to late 80s, the company actually saw an opportunity to publish their own magazine, which of course is the extremely well-known and popular Nintendo Power Magazine, which started in late 1988. And the magazine eventually became kind of the go-to place for Nintendo gamers to get their information on their favorite games. It's highly collectible nowadays. They've got a lot of great articles in it. But the one thing that I think separated it from most gaming magazines of the day is they had a lot of dedicated sections on how to get past difficult spots or tricks or passwords that you can use for the game to, find a new level. I remember specifically you can get the Otherworld circuit in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out by putting in a specific code that I found in Nintendo Power Magazine when my brother wasn't looking. So the one problem that you run into is, what if your game wasn't featured in the magazine?
Damn you.
Yeah, you're a SOL, right?
Yep.
unless your parents didn't care how much money you spent on your telephone.
Just get ready to say that.
Right. So it was the launch, of course, at the time, right as the Nintendo Power came out, Nintendo Power Line, a paid hotline for players to call, quote unquote, game counselors, was made available for a fee, if you will. It was like a 1-900 number back in the day. Mm-hmm. And basically, these game counselors had books and binders about every officially licensed Nintendo game. So they could look up anything that players had questions for. And actually, this led to Sega creating their own hotline. And the interesting part is that 89 and 88 were the 2 years of the tricks and tips explosion in the West. And especially when it comes to things like gaming magazines, books, and even VHS tapes were made. Now, Game Player magazines began distributing, interestingly enough, hour-long VHS tapes for players to buy that included tips and walkthroughs for several video games like RoboCop for the NES, and even a video game on how to use the Power Glove that featured scenes from the movie The Wizard. So, So Game Players magazine had this entire set. Now, the interesting part, too, is that it was available for rent at the time, too. So if you were struggling, you can go to your local Blockbuster and potentially pick up these games. Now, the VHS tapes became a popular way for players to get walkthroughs and information on game releases. Some of the most popular included Hot News 64, which is super corny. GamePro, Video Game Secret Tips, Tactics, and Passwords. Street Fighter 2, Mastering Great Combinations and Strategies. And a promotional video for the Sega Game Gear for hotel patrons of Howard Johnson. They could get free for renting a Game Gear from the front desk.
Nice.
Yeah. And that one, if you have not seen it, it is so over the top and weird.
Super cringy.
Super cringy. It's a guy who is
what every marketing executive in the 90s thought a cool kid looked like.
Yes, exactly. Right. And he's trying to convince this one guy who's an older guy to play Game Gear. And one of his lines is, and kids go, ho, Joe, for Game Gear and Sega here.
And you know, sir, that Howard Johnson is the family vacation hotel. And kids go, ho, Joe. With Sega. It's the perfect family hotel experience.
Yeah. Oh, God.
So bad.
It is so bad.
Hello, front desk. I'd like a cheeseburger, a prostitute, and a Sega Game Gear, please.
So it is on YouTube, too. So if anybody's interested in checking this out, it's available to you. Actually, every single one of these VHS tapes that I've suggested are available on YouTube. So definitely check those out.
Nice.
So eventually, though, both books and VHS kind of fell out of favor with the introduction of websites like Game FAQs, which actually started in 1995. I didn't know it started that early, but it's where players could access information for free, and it was often written by the players themselves. So there were it wasn't like a corporate thing. It was very much a passion project for a lot of these folks, which that's where that transition happened, right? Where all of a sudden you could look stuff up on the internet to figure out how to win at your favorite game, if you will. So in a way, it was the kind of the ending or the passing of the torch when it came to tips and tricks and stuff. But prior to that, all the things you had to do in order to figure out how to play your favorite games required a lot of reading and maybe a lot of rewinding.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, beating games was hard back in the day. Unless you had a friend who was a total gaming ace, you likely had to pony up some dough to get access to tips and tricks. So,
or you just snuck a peek at your brother's Nintendo Power.
That's nuts to me. I feel like everything that I owned that was mine, my parents were like, no, you need to share with your younger siblings. So nothing was ever really mine. It was mostly theirs.
You know, that happened later in my life where it was sharing clothes. Where Jim had to like let me wear his t-shirts and stuff, but he wasn't happy about it. I remember like walking out the door with a Smashing Pumpkins t-shirt on. Jim be like, "What are you wearing that for?"
Because Mom said I could.
All right, though, to wrap things up, thank you for attending today's lesson. Just a reminder, if you have any ideas for stories you'd like to hear, send us a message at gamersweekpodcast@gmail.com, and we might feature your suggestion.
All right. Thank you, Professor Rybread. And let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 16 of Gamers Week Podcast. And a big thank you to the Retro Game Club Podcast and the Leadist Podcast for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget to check out their links in the show notes. If you want to connect with Gamers Week, follow us on Twitter at GamersWeekPC. Email us at gamersweekpodcast@gmail.com. Visit our merch store at gamers-week-podcast.creator-spring.com. Or if you want to do it the easy way, follow the link in the show notes. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/gamersweek. And finally, since you made it all the way to the end of this episode, please leave us a rating and a review to let us know how we did. We really do value your feedback. And while you're there, consider subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. That's all for us tonight. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next week. Anyone who's not a patron is not going to get what that weird noise is.
Nope. Beware the fishes, people. Beware the fishes.